For decades, marketers have been chasing the secret to ads that don't just get seen, but actually get acted on. They've focused on everything: design, targeting, really complex funnels. But what if I told you the most powerful conversion tool isn't some new technology, but a simple, timeless psychological formula? Today, we're going to dissect a framework that literally turns passive scrollers into urgent buyers by exploiting a fundamental human truth.
And here it is. The secret isn't your visual design, it's a formula that's built on our deepest motivator, pain. Now that one idea, it changes everything. It means the fastest way to a sale isn't by showing off pleasure or some future gain. No, it's about highlighting and then intensifying a discomfort that someone already has. It's a total shift in perspective that puts raw psychology way ahead of just making things look pretty. You realize people buy first and foremost to solve a problem that is actively hurting them right now.
So, that brings us to the big question, right? What exactly is this psychological sequence? How can 3 simple lines of text just bypass all our logical defenses and trigger this immediate, almost primal need to do something? Well, the answer lies in a framework that understands human nature maybe even better than we understand ourselves. It's a sequence that's not designed to persuade you, but to create a situation where buying feels like the only possible next step.
Okay, to really get this, we're going to break it all down. First, we'll dive into the big sales secret: why emotion always beats logic. Then we'll look at the modern crisis of attention that made this formula so critical. After that, we'll unpack the 3-step sequence itself, the real engine here. We'll dig into the deep psychological triggers it pulls, learn the rules to master it, and finally, get to the simple, profound reason it works so well: it makes the suffering stop.
This brings us to a huge paradox in modern sales. We're all taught to build these logical arguments for why someone should buy something, right? We list features, benefits, data. But the truth is, the fastest path to a sale doesn't run through the logical part of the brain. It's forged by creating and then solving emotional discomfort. You've heard it before. People don't buy a drill because they want a drill. They buy it because they need a hole. This framework, it focuses entirely on the pain of not having that hole.
And the system that does this is called the Problem-Agitate-Solve framework, or PAS, and its purpose is brutally efficient. It's designed to bypass a user's analytical mind and tap directly into their anxiety. It doesn't waste time trying to convince with data. It creates a state of psychological tension that's so strong, the user feels this deep compulsion to find relief. And that relief, of course, is positioned as your product. It doesn't just present a solution, it makes that solution feel like a necessary escape.
So you might be wondering, why did a formula like this even need to exist? Well, it was born out of a crisis, the crisis of ad saturation. In the world we live in now, you don't have 5 minutes to make your case. Heck, you don't even have 5 seconds. Your ad is just one little tile in an infinite scroll of content, and everything is competing for a tiny sliver of attention. This environment demanded a totally new kind of weapon, something less like a persuasive essay and more like a surgical strike.
The challenge became brutally clear. You have to achieve the absolute maximum psychological impact in under 3 seconds. That's the window you have to stop a thumb from scrolling. You can't build a logical case in that time. You can't list 10 features. You need a formula that hits with the force of a hammer, something that instantly creates a relevance and emotional engagement. The PAS framework was engineered for this exact, high-pressure world where attention is the most valuable thing there is.
And the psychological principle that makes all of this possible is a cornerstone of behavioral economics: loss aversion. It's this simple but incredibly profound idea that we are far more motivated to avoid a loss than we are to achieve a gain. The emotional sting of losing $100 is roughly twice as intense as the joy of finding $100. And this isn't just about money. It's about time, status, comfort, peace of mind. This is the human code the PAS framework is built to exploit.
This slide just reframes the whole game of marketing. Most ads, they focus on the pleasure of gain. Buy our product and you'll get this amazing future benefit. PAS completely flips the script. It focuses on the pain of loss. You have this problem right now, and if you don't do something, it's only going to get worse. By anchoring the message in an existing, real pain, it taps into a much, much more powerful psychological force. The desire to stop a current suffering is way more urgent than the desire to get a future pleasure.
Okay, so we get the why, this crisis of attention, and the principle of loss aversion. Now let's pop the hood and really look at the how. We're going to unpack the 3 distinct stages of this psychological sequence that so effectively turns discomfort into action. This is where you see the raw power of the formula.
So how does it actually work in the real world?
How do you take someone from just passively scrolling on their phone to a state of urgent need in just 3 lines of text? It's not magic, it's a carefully designed emotional journey with 3 very specific, calculated steps. Each one builds on the last to create this overwhelming need for a resolution.
The sequence is problem, agitate, solve. First, you state the problem. You identify one single acute pain point the user is feeling right now. This step creates instant relevance. The user thinks, hey, that's me, they get my situation. Second, and listen, this is the most important part, you agitate. You take that problem and you pour salt in the wound. You crank up the emotional consequences. You answer the question, so what? What is this problem costing them in time, money, sleep, or peace of mind? You make the pain more vivid, more present, more unbearable. And finally, once that tension is at its absolute peak, you introduce the solve. You present your product not as a nice-to-have, but as the one and only source of immediate relief from the pain you just amplified.
Let's be perfectly clear about this. The problem statement gets their attention. The solve statement closes the loop, but the agitation step, that's the high-leverage pivot. It is the engine of the entire framework. Without really effective agitation, the problem is just a minor annoyance and the solution feels optional. But with powerful agitation, the problem becomes a crisis and the solution becomes a necessity. This is the step where the sale is truly made.
All right, now that we've seen the mechanics, let's go a little deeper into the science. Why is this sequence so psychologically powerful? It's not just some clever copywriting trick. It's a systematic activation of some of the most powerful drivers of human behavior. We're going to look at the specific levers it's pulling inside the user's mind to create that feeling of, I need this now.
So there are 3 main psychological levers at play here. First, loss aversion. That agitate step, it frames the user's situation not just as a problem, but as an ongoing loss that is actively getting worse. Second is emotional arousal. The agitation phase is specifically designed to create negative emotions like anxiety, frustration, and worry. And these are highly activating emotions. They create a powerful internal drive to do something to make them go away. And third is the need for closure. By identifying a problem and then intensely agitating it, the framework creates an open loop, the state of mental tension. The solve is then presented as the only way to close that loop and get that sweet, sweet psychological relief.
This slide just illustrates the core job of that middle step perfectly. Agitation isn't just about making the problem seem worse, it's about creating an urgent psychological gap. It creates this powerful tension between the user's current painful reality and a potential state of relief. And that gap, it's uncomfortable. It's like a mental itch that the brain feels an immediate powerful compulsion to scratch. The more you agitate, the wider the gap, and the more desperate the user becomes to close it with your solution.
Okay, so we've got the theory, we've got the psychology. Now let's move from just understanding this to actually executing it. How do you master this framework? How do you apply these principles to write copy that really converts, reliably? Well, there are a few hard and fast rules that separate the amateurs from the masters.
The first and absolutely most important rule is this: isolate the singular pain. This is where most people get it wrong. They try to list multiple problems or they cram every single product feature into the ad. That is a huge mistake. The PAS framework's power comes from its laser focus. You have to identify the one single most acute pain point your customer experiences and build the entire 3-line sequence around that one thing. A message that tries to solve everything ends up having 0 impact.
Now, building on that singular focus, mastery requires 3 more things. First, leverage the agitation. This isn't just saying, oh, it's frustrating. No, it's about quantifying the cost. How many hours are they wasting? How much money is this costing them? How is it affecting their sleep or their relationships? You have to make the consequences of doing nothing feel vivid and real. Next, position the solve as inevitable relief. The language should be simple, direct, and frame your product as the fastest, easiest way to make the pain stop. It's not a great new tool, it's the cure. And finally, the entire sequence has one goal: to transform passive scrolling into compelled action. You do that by making the relief you offer feel not just desirable, but absolutely necessary.
And this brings us to the final essential takeaway. If you forget everything else we've talked about, remember this one core insight. It's the philosophical foundation that makes this entire framework so undeniably effective. It's the cold, hard logic behind why this simple formula works time and time again in any industry.
The crucial point is this: the system works because human action is most powerfully compelled by the desire to escape discomfort. We are creatures that are hardwired to move away from pain, not just physical pain, but emotional and psychological pain.
The PAS framework doesn't try to create some new desire out of thin air. It just taps into the most powerful existing desire we all have, the desire for our current suffering to end.
And this is a really profound shift in how you should think about marketing. We often talk about pushing customers through a sales funnel, but the best marketing, the kind that PAS is a perfect example of, it doesn't push, it pulls. It creates such a strong tension, such an undeniable need for relief that the customer actively and urgently pulls themselves toward the solution you're offering. You're not forcing a sale, you're facilitating a necessary escape. And you know what? The customer thanks you for it.
In the end, the logic of this three-line formula applied to that profound human impulse to resolve pain, it all comes down to this. The reason it converts scrollers into buyers with such incredible speed is because, for the user, in that moment, your solution serves one simple, powerful, and irresistible purpose. It makes the suffering stop.